Welcome to the Sacred Birthwork and Business podcast, where sacred birthwork meets soul-aligned business. I'm your host, Anna Lundqvist, a former midwife, now sacred birthworker mentor, business coach, and the founder of Sacred Birth International. My intention with this podcast is to inspire you to follow your birthworker calling and to step fully into your power and purpose and unapologetically claim your place as the feminine leader that you were meant to be in your life and community. Let's reclaim sacred birthwork, let's reclaim sacred business, and let's do it the feminine way. Let's begin. Welcome back to episode number 2 in this little introductory series of this new podcast. We're diving on into my calling to midwifery, my calling to become a birth worker. I left you off in the first episode in Byron Bay, where I was living my purpose then of being a women's work facilitator, holding sacred space for women in circle, doing journeys with women for months on end in these closed containers, where we would dive on deep into all things feminine leadership, feminine embodiment, diving into the moon blood mysteries about our cycles and seasons, diving on into different aspects of being woman, feminine sexuality, our voice, our expression in the world. I loved this work. I still love this work. It's a big part of who I am. And you've heard about my journey from being a young teenager seeking my people and finding my path. And here I am now, truly feeling the pull, the calling to birth work, which I think a lot of you who are listening probably feel resonant with. Either you are now kind of feeling this pull, this calling, maybe you're here to be inspired to see, is this maybe my way? Maybe you've been thinking about becoming a midwife, but you don't resonate with the system. You don't want to work in a hospital. You don't want to go into uni. You don't want to do the training in the hospital system. Or maybe you're thinking about becoming a doula or a sacred birth worker, fill in the blank. Or you are a birth worker already, and maybe you also resonate with this feeling of being called to this very ancient work, ancient women's business, truly, midwifery. It's one of the absolute oldest feminine professions, because let's face it, it is women's business. Now, there's a few men who are midwives and men who are birth workers, but primarily this is truly a woman's domain. This is feminine business. This is women's business. Women have always had other women present for their births. That men came into the birth world is very recent, very new. Even that partners and husbands participated is a new thing. Women have always birthed with other women. It's women's business. The oldest profession in the world to hold as a woman. We've always been with other women as we birth. Wise woman of the village, the midwife. Midwife meaning being with woman. That is the meaning of midwife. And that is truly how I've always viewed the word midwife, the profession midwife. And when I ended up there in Byron Bay, I, for the first time, was in an area where I was normal, first and foremost. If you don't know this area in the world, Byron Bay is kind of this old hippie kind of colony, in a sense. It really is quite alternative. A lot of people living in this area are an alternative bunch who seek the natural, growing their own food, eating organic, homeschooling their children, home birthing, and it's such a very special place on earth. I really just want to give it the credit that it's due. It just is so beautiful. It's by the ocean. It's very rural, very countryside feeling. It's very buzzing. It has an international kind of community because people are drawn to this place. It is a healing place. It's said that you come to Byron, to this area, to heal. It has crystals in the ground. It is a very potent, very feminine place. A lot of women are drawn here. So it's definitely dominating in women compared to men ratio. It's a feminine healing place. And indigenous peoples have come throughout the ages to this spot to meet, to gather, to heal, to yeah, do ceremony. It's very, very very strong, this energy of healing, and it's beautiful, it's soft, I love this area, as you can hear. And so I was here, and being a women's work facilitator and for years being in this energy, I was very much for serving women and for reclaiming all that we have lost as women throughout the ages. Our own spirituality, the way we practice spirituality as women is very much in community. It is focused on love, life, pleasure, joy, singing, dancing, drumming, being really the channels between the heavens and the earth, strengthening and knowing our power in our intuition, our third eye, our womb, connection through the womb, as our portal between life and death, but also, how it taps us into the collective consciousness of all. And it felt like it was time to add, this rite of passage that it is to go from maiden to mother, to birth new life, to assist woman as she truly is the embodiment of the portal between heaven and the earth. And I just started to feel this whisper, and I met midwives in the area. I learned that, they had such a high percentage of home births in the Shire, and so many women would birth just naturally, physiologically, if not at home, then in the birth center that was served by midwives. And I had spent, as I said before coming to Byron, spent half a year in New Zealand, and I met a beautiful woman there who was very active in the home birth community, who had home birthed all her children. And I was so inspired by her. And I think it planted a seed. So when I came to Byron and I met midwives and I learned about just the culture there, and that there was an opportunity to, if I studied to be a midwife in this area, that I would walk alongside these midwives in home births and birth center births. I felt like there was a yes there. There was a yes to the calling to become a midwife, to walk alongside women and serve them in the portal. That was what called me. I was never called for the babies. A lot of birth workers and midwives, that is maybe their feeling of calling, like they want to be there as new life enters and they want to safeguard the passage for the babies. And of course, that matters too. Don't get me wrong. I don't not care about that. But truly, where I came from and where I still am very much when it comes to midwifery, to birth work, how I approach this is I am there to walk alongside the woman and assist her. She's the one that's there to birth the baby and safeguard that. And I'm there to hold her space and safeguard her space for that to be unfolding to them, for the highest good of all. And so that's where my calling was. That was where my longing was. My longing was to really expand how I held ceremony, because to me, birth is ceremony. The whole period of pregnancy, birth, and postpartum, that bubble, that rite of passage made into mother, is a ceremony. A clear start and ending, and just this transformation that happens through different events throughout that long period of time. That is ceremony. And I had, as you know now, I'd held ceremony for, I mean, most of my life, even before I kind of went deeper into women's business, ceremony through holding yoga, through being a coach, through creating sacred spaces for massage and the spa even. Before that, as I was doing nature medicine and I was doing stuff. I actually started with massage after that at 18, 19. I was doing it already. I was creating sacred spaces for people very early on in my life. And so it's just a part of me. It's a part of my essence, I think, and what I will always do. It just brings me so much joy to create sacred, beautiful ceremonial spaces for people. I've also, been dreaming of one day to become a celebrant and hold that, like doing ceremonies for all kinds of rites of passages and big life events. That is just a piece of me. And so it became this natural path for me to apply to become a midwife. Why I had never like thought that I wanted to do that before this period of time in Byron is because in Sweden you have to become a nurse first. So you have to study, I think it's 3 years to become a nurse. I think you have to work for a year as a nurse before you can then become a midwife, which I think is another year of studying and then also doing prac in the hospital system. And I do not care for hospitals or sick care, or I'm not interested at all in being a nurse at all. I never enjoyed the medical part of being a midwife. I did it, but it wasn't something that lit me up. Some people in my cohort loved that part. They wanted to do cesareans and being there. They wanted to be like doing inductions and more the medicalized stuff. They thrived from that. They loved that. That was never, ever, ever something I loved or even liked doing. It was just a part of the role that I accepted for a time to be a part of my journey, but it was never what I really wanted. So I applied to join um, the uni cohort and got accepted. And I remember the first week of starting uni and realizing, even the first week, I realized, oh, yeah, this is not me. Let's put it like that. I remember crying and knowing that, oh, what have I gotten myself into? This is not at all the kind of midwifery path I was longing for. Because remember, I had been inspired by my New Zealand friend, and how you learn in New Zealand is very different. And you can go straight into home birth after the 3 years, which I somehow thought was the same in Australia, but it wasn't. And I learned that the first week, kind of like a cold shower. But I'd already begun my studies then, and I loved being in Byron. I had no desire to go to New Zealand. So I soldiered on, as you say. Um, because in New Zealand, yeah, you learn everything you need to know to be an independent midwife after 3 years. Whereas in Australia, at least when I was studying, it was more so really learning to become an obstetric nurse, more so. That was at least how I experienced it. Now, I was lucky because I was living in this area that had so much home birth, so much natural physiological birth happening in the birth center. And so I got so much exposure to that. And then I went to hospital where I saw the other reality that most people in my cohort, because my uni was 1 hour, was it 1 hour? I think one or so hour north where I lived, which was the Gold Coast in Australia, which is a very different kind of demographic. And up there, the people who had all their kind of practical training up there, they never saw almost. I don't think they ever saw just a natural, spontaneous start of labor, spontaneous, natural ending of the birth process without any medical interference because they were all in hospitals. And that's kind of just what happens there. And so even though uni and my hospital shifts would show me and teach me to become this more obstetric nurse, than what I saw, like what is a midwife, an autonomous midwife. I still got so much normal, so much natural through both doing continuity of care with women in my community throughout my 3 years of studying, and then doing mentorship with one of the Byron birth center midwives, and seeing just so much normal, so much physiological birth, which I later on really realized coming back to Sweden and just learning and talking to other midwives around the world that like during the training, if you're not doing like an apprenticeship kind of midwifery training with home birth midwives or birth center birth midwives, you just do not get exposed to natural normal. It's like almost extinct to see this in the world nowadays. You really have to be in the home birth space, or birth center that's freestanding kind of thing to not just constantly see the medicalization of woman, of pregnancy, of birth, of absolutely everything, the whole continuum. So I had that at least. But it was a really tough 3 years of going through that uni degree and feeling of being a part of so much trauma, witnessing obstetric violence, being a student. It's hard to handle that because you're also in this culture where you're the student and you're treated as such. Of course, trying to still advocate for the woman, but it's kind of survival mode as a student, I would say. And very much there's this saying called midwives and nurses eat their young. And it's very much like that. And maybe if you're listening to this, your experience is the same as a student, or maybe you were lucky. But it is a tough environment. The hospital is very tough. I think the midwives who survive their long term have to really desensitize to the actual obstetric violence that they're a part of and seeing and maybe even doing to women, because that's a part of the policies and guidelines they have to follow and the culture in their birth suite, their ward. Of course, there's amazing midwives working in the system. And I think many of them who somehow stay there do suffer witnessing this and being a part of this. And I know for sure that I did, had a very hard time with that. And it has taken me years to process that, of having had to be a part of witnessing and sometimes, be doing stuff I don't want to do as a student. And then I graduated, and because there's this normal thing that we do in Australia is that after you've done your uni degree, you do a graduate year. So I went out and I did a graduate year in hospital, continuing being in this environment that really, really hurt me. I mean, I learned a lot and I'm very grateful, and I witnessed beautiful births, and I love the magic of birth in all birth settings, but it was never my place to be. And so after that year, or actually a little bit less than that, when I resigned, I decided, no, I can never ever do this again. I can never be in a hospital again. I don't want to. I won't. I won't do it to myself. I don't want to put myself um, in this energy, in this place that gives me so much anxiety. Um, there's so much fear in the hospital, and so much of what birth workers within that system, obstetricians, nurses, midwives, how they're acting is from fear. It's a very strong sense of like that, just being scared. And so that's where also like the micromanaging and all the interventions come from fear. And being a highly sensitive person, being in such an intuitive that I am, that really affects you to be in that energy. It affects you also then how you are in that environment. I always tried my best to bring my regulated nervous system, and I tended to have a lot of natural normal. Even as a student, I had to do extra shifts to like go and do cesareans and, be exposed to the medicalization because I actually somehow just manifested a lot of normal, even within the hospital. So the women I cared for, their families. And so that continued also when I was working in the system. But of course, you get everything. But yeah, I was somehow either I manifested that, or part of it was also probably who I was in the room and that I did less. And that also, I truly believe, and this is something I very much teach with in my sacred birthworker mentorship, how important it is that we do the inner work, that we do not bring fear or stress or anything into the birth room, that we come in as a clean slate and that we meet this woman where she is in her process and how she is, what she needs. So I think that definitely had an effect in how also the birth outcomes for the women that I cared for was, for sure. I mean, otherwise, I think I would see something very different. So I didn't last long though. I decided that I will never set my foot in the hospital system again. I will never be a midwife in the hospital again. And I resigned and I decided I would only do home birth from now on. And I did. And at the same time, I also, the same kind of day or days, that week of resigning, I started an Instagram account called The Spiritual Midwife. And for years, this was the name that I was known as. Maybe you heard of that. Maybe you know me since that. And I finally felt like I could show up on social media again, because that's something very much that you learn as a registered midwife, that you're not allowed to kind of share things on social media. It's very strict. And you also, they put fear in you around that too, about speaking your mind and speaking your truth. And when I finally resigned, I was like, no more. I'm speaking my mind, and I'm speaking about birth the way that I see it, as a rite of passage, as something sacred, as women, as sovereign human beings who deserve to be cared for throughout this, beautiful rite of passage of maiden to mother, not as a patient, but as a sovereign woman, stepping into her power, really being shown her power through birth. And that's where my online journey started. And I really want to weave into this now, because here we kind of move into my shift from, doing my studies, becoming a midwife, going through the motions, ticking the boxes, being the good girl, just getting it done with, to finally, here's kind of a line in the sand where I'm like, done. I'm done now. This is done. I've done the hard yards. I've done 4 years of the dark system that I feel like it is, the old paradigm that I do not want to be a part of. I don't want to be associated with it. I do not want to step my foot into that. Um, it's time for me now. It's time to step in who I truly am, and become that midwife, um, or embody her, and fully express her truly, really, because I've been holding back. Mind you, when I say that, I still am me, right? I'm still me without a filter. People knew who I was and what I thought. I was way too vocal about that. I was definitely the Byron midwife, where I was working in that hospital. And yeah, did things that triggered the very medicalized midwives, that didn't like the way that I approached things, for sure. So, but according to my standard, I was holding myself back, knowing who I was and what I wanted to share with the world. Now, wind back, I kept on doing my temples, by the way. Throughout all this time, I was still doing a regular weekly temple series for women, and building community with women, which really saved me also through these years, like coming and purging and sharing and dancing and moving and releasing in Woman's Circle. There's nothing better. There's no better therapy, truly. So I think that's also why I went through the whole training, because I had my women and I had my circle. And that was such a blessing. And so I was doing that. It was very popular. It was always fully booked out. I was very blessed with that. And I had a friend of mine who, a few months before I decided, okay, I'm resigning, I'm not doing this anymore, I can't stand this, working in a hospital anymore. She said that she was going to do an online course. She's going to, or online training, like create one and put herself out there and do that. And I remember sitting, having a glass of wine with her in Byron as I was visiting from where I was living. And I said to her, oh my God, that is just I was way too much in the fear at that time. I was so scared of. I think for me at that time it was really the witch wound, which if that you go like, what do you mean with that? Well, back in the day, right, when the witch burnings were happening and so many women were burnt and drowned and killed for being women, being intuitive, being maybe having a voice, being a woman, just a woman, really. The first ones to burn, the first ones to be prosecuted were midwives. And so it's very intertwined in this profession. Um, the witch wound and being a midwife. And I think if you're a conscious woman working in this profession, whether you're a doula or a midwife, but especially a midwife, you feel this. You feel the fear of prosecution. Because it's still happening, it's just not killing you. There's still very much a witch hunt of midwives today. If you're independent midwife, if you're not working within the hospital system, you're definitely hunted around the world, and the powers to be definitely are trying to get you and scrutinizing everything you do. And as you probably know already, if there's anything that happens at a home birth, that's blown up on the news. But when things happen every day in the hospital, you do not hear about that. Right. So there's very much still a witch hunt, and we feel it very strongly. The silence culture is very strong within working within that system or being registered, because again, the powers to be hold power over you as you have this registration. You can't just speak your mind as freely as you maybe want to. And I felt this, I felt the heaviness of this, still working in the system. And when she said, "Oh yeah, I'm going to do this online training, I'm going to create this training." And I said to her, "Oh, my witch wound is way too strong for that." And I would never dare to go online. Knowing what I do now, that's a pretty funny statement. So this was probably 2019 that I said this to her. I would never, I would never dare to go online. I would be too scared of prosecution, of being hunted down, of other midwives reporting me, of just, yeah, the sisterhood wound and the witch wound was so strong in me. And I don't know what shifted. Maybe there was a seed planted when she said that, because only a few months later, when I resigned, I knew I had to go online. I knew somehow that, okay, so I won't go back to the hospital system. I need to have an income that's not just dependent on me being on call. I kind of knew that already 2019. I don't know how conscious it was, but it was there. And so I also had this strong dream in 2019 that I was gonna like, and I really wanted to go back rural, like back in nature, and I wanted to grow my own food. I want to be more self-sufficient. I just had this strong feeling that I needed to become more sovereign and self-sufficient, and somehow not remove myself from society, but just become more free, I guess. And just, yeah, it was a strong inner urge, inner knowing. And funny, I feel like, the year after COVID happened, and then just world went to crazy. So there was some sort of pre-warning in my system, like get out into the countryside, grow your own food, just, be healthy in nature. Anyways, she planted the seed. A few months later, I had enough. I resigned. And that week, I started a spiritual midwife account on Instagram, and I took an online course teaching me how to create an online course, because I had, and my idea then was not to become like, oh, I'm going to be this, international online business that I am today, Sacred Birth International, which is truly, today fully carrying me, which is amazing, and I'm thriving in my business. That was not the idea. I just really wanted to serve. I had been in the system for years, seeing how women just rocked up thinking that they were going to be safe and cared for in the hospital system, had not prepared for birth at all, or very, bare minimum, can maybe like a hospital class or something really that taught them about the different pain relief options, and maybe a little bit about the stages of labor. That actually, honestly, there are no stages of labor. Labor is so unique and different to each woman, which if you're a birth worker, you know this. And it just hurt me so much to see this woman just come in into the lion's den like little lambs, and um, so many experiencing trauma and having birth trauma. I mean, we know the statistics that are like kind of official is that 1 in 3 women have birth trauma, right? They report they have birth trauma, that they had a traumatic birth, and 1 in 20 have PTSD as if they have gone to war birthing their babies. Now, that is not, my true belief is that that is not because birth inherently causes trauma. It's because one, they don't know what they're doing. They're not prepared for this portal they're entering. No one's teaching them that. They're not seeing that in their community. They're not seeing their mother or their friends birthing. So the first time they experience birth is when they birth and they're so unprepared for it. And then they walk into a system that do not hold space for natural physiological birth, that doesn't know how to support women holistically. They just see women as parts, the biomedical model of care. They walk in there and they want to intervene and protect and support in a way that just creates more and more interventions that causes more and more birth trauma. It is a shit show. And so I was very angry and furious and sad and grieving and all the feels when I quit. And I just knew I had to do something. I had to bring my message out. I had to share with people how they can prepare. And so I had the idea, I wanted to create the natural birth course. And that's what I did. I took an online course to learn how to create an online course. And I created the natural birth course in my brother's kitchen as I went home for the holidays in 2019. I also went home because my dad had received a cancer diagnosis. So I was also there for a longer time. I was there for 2 months to support him on his journey with cancer. And that's how I did it. Very simple in my brother's kitchen. And I'll tell you more about that one day, about how I made an online course the first time. And then I went back to Australia. I created a second course a bit later called the Nourishing Postpartum course. Of course, we know COVID happened 2020, so I was locked in my house and I thought, what better time to start a podcast? Because I had the idea that I really wanted to help women reprogram their subconscious minds. And what better way than storytelling? So that's how I started my first podcast, the Natural Birth Podcast, where I interview women around the world about their natural empowering birth stories. And I started my journey of being an online entrepreneur and doing some of the things I learned in the online course to market it, and it worked. And then after half a year, I stopped doing the things that worked. Why? Self-sabotage bullshit. Excuse my language. But I still had so much of that witch wound, sisterhood wound, imposter syndrome. Like, who am I to talk about this? Who am I to put myself out there? I still felt very much like that. Could I really take that space? I mean, that's still something that I navigate today. It's something I think we always are going to navigate, our sisterhood wound, our witch wound, our imposter syndrome, not good enough, fear of judgment, all of these things. It's very human and very also woman. I think we're even worse than men around these things of holding ourselves back because we're afraid of criticism, of being judged, of who do you think you are. All countries have different words for it, like tall poppy syndrome, or here in Sweden it's called jantelag. And like we all have it, I think, very strongly within us that we need to be with and walk with and work with. And something I work very hard with my, you know, mentees with, and also my students in the business course for birth workers. Because really, when it comes to doing business, really stepping into your businesswoman, 80% is mindset. 80% is feeling the fear and doing it anyways. 80% is the inner world, the inner talk, your inner critic, like dealing with her, having strategies that help you deal with her and doing it anyway. And really, accessing that the purpose and your desire to be of service is bigger than your fears that are holding you back. And so I had that very strongly. So I self-sabotaged. I just stopped doing the things that really worked. Go figure. And And I kept doing what made me feel safe, which was the temples, the women's circles. I started a it was called feminine leadership mentorship for some of my women that had been journeying with me for years in my circles. They wanted to learn how to do the work I did, so I taught them in a mentorship. Actually, that one was online. And so I did do that, but it was physical women I knew and could meet. And we had a physical also circle weekend, a retreat. So I was still kind of playing it safe with what I knew and what I had been doing for so many years, my women's work. And I was attending home births in the area, and I was doing the podcast, and what else was I doing? Yeah. And kind of like I was selling a few courses here and there, but not a lot. I wasn't at all, being able to live from my online business like I am today. And I kept on doing that, for a couple of years until it was time for me to return to Sweden. And that journey was really big. I just got this strong, intuitive feeling that it was time. I did not see it coming, I can tell you that. I thought I was going to stay in Australia, that was going to be my home. And I loved it. I love my community. I have such a strong community. Still do. They're still there. I'm just on the other side of the world now. And I loved my life there. I was thriving. I was really thriving in what I was doing and the setup I had with in-person work and online, and really, really happy. But something just told me that it was time to return to Sweden. And that made me feel happy. It felt like it came from love, like I wanted that, but it was still a really huge process of returning to my homeland. And I'm going to tell you that story and how I, through that move, decided to go from being a midwife, a registered midwife, to to deregistering and becoming the midwitch, and how Sacred Birth International was born. That is going to be the next episode. Thank you so much for being here and listening and learning about my journey. Please tell me if it's resonating with you. Maybe you're finding similarities. If you're a midwife, or you've been a midwife, or you're a birth worker of some sort, how was your initiation into this work? I'd love to know. Please comment if you're watching on YouTube or in your podcast app, or come on over to sacredbirthinternational.com to to my website, or go to Sacred Birth International on Instagram and let us know there. I'd love to know. Send me a message, comment on our reels for the podcast. I'd love to connect with you. Thank you for listening. If you love this podcast, then please share the love on your podcast app by leaving a comment, or pop over to our Instagram at Sacred Birth International. I'd love to connect there. If you'd like to know more about